go over to the live stream site and view the session from there, and hopefully you can interact through the chat over there.
We're good. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today for this kickoff of this music theory course. Apparently, there's a lot of people in the room from what I'm told, so that's great. I'm excited about this course. This is going to be for any kinds of players, really, but mostly for players who have an interest in understanding what they're playing and understanding music theory, which can be really scary if you don't have a proper method. And hopefully today we're gonna clear some of the things that might scare you, and I hope that this is the first for you of a weekly thing. In the next 8 weeks, we're gonna go through the basic elements of music theory, and by the end of week 8, you'll be able to take all that and apply it to whatever you're working with. You can branch out with these lessons to study more complex theory concepts or different types of scales, and you'll be able to apply anything we're talking about today in your own journey, musical journey. So that's really the hope with this course. This is kind of an interactive course in the sense that you're more than welcome to talk amongst yourselves in the chat, and at the end of each session there's going to be a special time where you can ask me questions. I'll make sure to answer them as best as I can. And also the opportunity to get online, get live, get your face on the webcam if you want people to see you. That's great, and we can just kind of interact that way. But before we start, I just kind of want to give you my thoughts on music theory and why I think it would be beneficial for you. I'm sure we all come from different musical backgrounds, but I think this is probably something that will be beneficial to everyone, really. But let me start by telling you my first steps with music theory years ago when I was, I can't remember how old I was. I was probably 18 or so or 17 when I was really started to get interested in that. I've been playing at that time for a few years already, and I had a few things under my belt. And I knew some positions, I knew some licks, and I can play by ear pretty well. But anytime someone would try to talk to me about modes or words such as the Ionian, Dorian, Mixolydian, and all that, there was like a blockage in my mind, and almost a rebellious blockage in the sense that I didn't want to hear anything about it, because I had this fear that if I understood music theory, if I understood modes and all that, that would completely change my appreciation of music in general, and that would almost rob my playing from whatever soul it might have had at that time. And so for a long time, I kind of fought against the idea of understanding what I was playing in music theory. Plus, at the time, I was more of a rocker, had long hair, and I thought, electric guitar is freedom. I still think that today. But at the time, I thought that anything that would try to explain what I was playing would put me in a box and prevent me to be a rocker or to improvise freely. And, I had this idea that music was really important, and I still do for me today, but that theory would just kind of put a lid on that box. And so one thing led to another, and I decided to go to school. Actually, I won a scholarship. I didn't even decide to go to school, but I won a scholarship towards a music school. That was back in South France, where I'm from, before I moved to the States. And there was theory course, Theory 101 or something like that, and not just for guitar players, for any kind of musician. And I went there, and at the end of the lesson, the rebellious me with long hair went to the teacher, who's really cool. He had long hair too, so that made it easier. But he was really a great musician, but he had a good understanding of music theory and all that. And I just had to flat out tell him, I don't know that I'm going to do well with this course because I feel that if I understand music theory, I understand scales and all those concepts, it's going to rob me from just the magic thing that happens when I listen to certain solos. That note that really makes me feel in a different world. Certain types of music do that to you. Certain sections of a song might do that to you, and you just love that section. At the time, I had that with some songs, and I thought that if I understood why I feel like that, I wouldn't feel like that anymore. And the teacher was great at the time because he could totally relate. He told me, I used to be like that too. And he told me, trust me, if you continue with this class and you do the work, at the end, yes, you will understand those magic moments. You will understand why. But it's not going to rob you from the joy. It's going to enhance it. And so I just trusted him, and it's true. It's really true. Understanding music and how it works doesn't take away the joy that you might have with a very simple, basic song. It doesn't. Understanding it just makes it even better. So I just wanted to start with that. If you're in that boat, I understand completely. We're going to talk a lot about things that might sound like we're trying to put all music in a box because we're explaining things. But I want you to keep an open mind. Understanding things doesn't mean that you can't explore other things. The possibilities are endless in music. It is a language. We're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to make the comparison between music theory, and language and conversation. And it's just like if you take, I'll take Stephen King, for example, an author you like. Let's say Stephen King, who writes great stories. But if Stephen King, we take a little 5-year-old Stephen King, ask him to write a story, he might have some really cool ideas, but they would come out like a 5-year-old would explain it to you. He still had the ideas, maybe. Now, you read a Stephen King book, it doesn't read like a 5-year-old. That's because he acquired, a new kind of vocabulary, a new way of storytelling, describing some things in a different way than a 5-year-old would. And all those things that he acquired, you can see that as music theory, but he's still himself, right? The story still stands out. So if you understand all these things, you're still going to be you. You're just going to understand what that means to be you. So that's the idea behind this course. We're going to talk a lot about, like I said, conversations. And if I take conversation, like I'm speaking to you today in English, that's one set of rules, right, that make the English language. The vocabulary, the words, the way that I build my sentences, and all those things. That's what music is, in a sense. There is a language, the language of music. It's not English, it's not French, it's music. And within that language, which is music, there are rules, ways of constructing musical ideas that are going to make sense to most. But that doesn't mean that you can't venture outside. You can do whatever you want, but this is going to help you have an impact on most people, if you understand. If we take the language, there are words, and these words are made of letters. Put one against the other, and that makes words. Words next to each other make licks or phrases, just like music. And the letters in music are going to be the notes. A single note is a letter. A few notes played at the same time make a chord, and that's just like hearing different sounds at the same time. A few notes played one after the other make a word, a series of sounds that together make a word, and a series of words together make a sentence. A series of licks together make a musical phrase. So we're going to concentrate a lot on those, on the smallest thing that we have to build language, and that's the alphabet. And in music, at least we will say it this way, even though it might not be true, but in music, we're going to deal with 7 notes. I said it might not be true because some of you might be a little more advanced and you might know more and read more than there is to read in this, but we're going to start really basic. So sometimes, for the purpose of this course, I'm going to say things, I'm going to give you statements that are not 100% true. We'll clarify that later in the course, but if I start by giving you all the exceptions, it's going to be too confusing. Don't want to do that. So I'm going to give you bold statements today that might not necessarily be true. I'm not lying to you. I'm just bear with me, okay? So we're going to talk about those letters, those notes. And an important thing in music is the way that you put these notes one after the other. If I just play a single note, you can gather a few informations, but not much. You can say, well, that's the sound of an electric guitar, so the sound. The pitch, well, it sounds like dum, that's it. But it doesn't really carry any emotional value. It's like me coming on the camera to you. You're ready for a lesson, and all that comes out is like that. Now, if I put that next to another sound, well, it's starting to draw an idea. Same with music. If I put one note next to the other, now it's not going to sound like a very just a bland sound. It's going to sound like an idea. It carries a little bit more emotional value to it, but it requires context. And in this case, when I play this, each of these two notes were the context for the other one. They related to each other. And that's really important. Whether these two notes are played one after the other or at the same time, there's context. That context is the separation between notes. And in music, that's called intervals. An interval is the distance between two notes. And without intervals, we wouldn't really have any emotion in our music. We'd just have one sound. And that's my song. Thank you very much. And here's track 2 of the album. There's nothing there, right? There's just a sound. You need a succession of notes to start having a story be told musically. So we're gonna get comfortable with those intervals, the distance between two notes. We're gonna measure all that. We're gonna spend time doing that. And there are different categories of intervals. There are wide intervals, there are short intervals, but each of these intervals can be two things. They can be major or minor. And a major thing, a major event is a big event. It's a big interval. A minor event is a small one. It's not that important. Important might not be the right word, but it's not as big as a major one. Same with intervals. A major interval, a wide interval. A minor interval, a narrower interval. And they're measured against each other. So this interval can be major, and the minor version of that interval is going to be narrower, okay, always. Now, if this interval right there, the distance between this and this, or this note and this note, and I can stack them like that. If the distance between this note and this note is minor, how do I make it major? I've got to increase the distance between those. I can increase it either by lowering this one or highering this one, raising this one, okay? So major, minor. That's the topic today, major and minor. Any interval can be major. What is an interval? Well, it's the distance between two notes, but how do we call those? We've got to give them names, and the names are just numbers. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're actually going to, instead of calling an interval 4, we'll say fourth, the fourth interval, or the third interval, or the second. What about the 1? Well, the 1 interval is is not an interval, because in order to have an interval, you need to have at least two notes, right? So 1 is like 1. It's also known as the root, the foundation. That 1 is the note from which we are stacking other notes to measure them. So that's our reference. The 1 is the reference. So 1 is not an interval. 1 is the starting point. So you've got 1, a second. A little bit wider than the second is the third. A little bit wider is the fourth, fifth, sixth, and so forth. And you could keep going. Oh, you can just keep going. You can either go all the way up to the 26th interval. We never talk like that, but in theory, we can, right? And the 26th interval is wider than the second. And each of these intervals, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, can be major or minor. Remember what I told you. I don't want people who just joined to say, hey, he said that the fourth could be major, and that's not true. You're right, but don't tell anyone else, because we'll talk about that later. But we're going to make very general, bold statements today just to differentiate those two. We'll dive in exceptions later on, next week actually, okay? But today it's all about major and minor, so you understand what a major interval is compared to a minor one. And by the way, this is the first time when I'm doing this live 1 hour thing on theory in this format. So hopefully I'll have enough material for an hour. But if not, this is a great opportunity for you to ask questions. And if there are questions that are pertinent to this, I'll take a few breaks here and there to answer them, because I want you to follow. And it would be a good idea, if you can, to just take notes. And also you can rewatch all the videos later on during the week. So you can always do that. All right, so far really simple, right? We know what an interval is. It's the distance between two notes. We know why those intervals are necessary in music, because without that, we would just have one note or one sound, not even a note, a sound. Out of context doesn't mean anything. So that's why intervals are important. And we also know that each interval, which has to involve two notes, right? A starting point, the root, and another note. And the distance between these two can be major or minor. And if you've been playing more than a week, you've heard those terms before. We hear them all the time: major chord, minor chord. So it has to do with the intervals, right? Next week is all about all those intervals, but today it's really between minor and major. So let's take, for example, we're going to talk about the thirds, because the thirds in music, that's the interval of the third, it has a very particular role in music. And if, I was going to say that a major or minor element can be compared to the gender of the chord, but then you're going to ask me which one is minor, and I can't answer that. None are. They're perfect, right? Perfect, get it? Like perfect interval. But that's for next week. But the idea is that the third really determines the nature of a musical element, a chord or a scale. And it can be major or minor. If it's major, it's going to be in the big box of major musical elements that we have. If it's minor, the big box of minor elements. So that's the first classification that we can do. Every musical element can be fit in one of these two boxes. Sometimes even they can fit both. But it has to do with a third. So let me show you on this. So I'm going to show you on the screen a chart with those intervals: major interval, minor interval, and you're going to see two diagrams there. We're going to talk a little bit about those. Those diagrams are movable, so you can play those anywhere you want on your fretboard. But we're going to take a look at the top one here. And the top one has three notes. The red note is the root note, the note from which we're measuring the other notes. In this case, I decided to play that root on the sixth string and fifth fret. So that's our root. So if I play that note on its own, it's nothing. It's just a sound. If I stack on it a third, I can decide to have a major or a minor third. The top diagram lists the minor thirds. You see that sign? It looks like a B. That's for flat. Flat, minor, pretty much the same thing. So if you see a flat, you can replace that with minor. Or I could say flat third if I wanted to, but same exact thing. Flat third, minor third, same exact thing here. So we're going to consider here a minor third or a flat third. I've got my root on the low E string, 5th fret. And if you look on the same string, the low E string, the first flat third that we find is on the 8th fret. So if I play these two notes one after the other, I've got my root, which is the red note. And after that, I play that flat third, which is on the 8th fret. The distance between this note and this one is a minor third. So you also see that there's another flat third in there on the next string. And that's because if we play that next flat third, which is on the 5th string, 3rd fret, it's the same exact sound that we had on the 6th string, 8th fret. These two notes sound exactly the same. And that's because we're playing an instrument that has the characteristic that you can play the same exact note, same pitch on different strings, different frets. So that's why I listed it there. That's going to be important later on. But that's the distance between these two notes. That's a flat third or a minor third. And if I consider these two intervals on the same string, so the low E string, frets 5 and 8, that's a minor third. If I want to make that minor third major, so the distance between this note and this one is minor, I want to make it major. Remember, minor, make it major, increase the distance between these two notes, and we always increase it by 1 fret. So instead of having 5, 8, which is a minor third, 8 plus 1, get your calculators out, everyone, 9. And so from 5 to 9, we have a major third. From 5 to 8, we have a minor third. And that's how you do it. And if I took this time the minor third, which is on the 5th string, 3rd fret, 1 fret higher is a major third. Let's hear how that sounds. On a single string, here's the minor third. And the major third is like that. Minor, major, minor, major. And here's the reason I listed that third, minor third on the next string. That way we can play two notes at the same time for chords. So now, minor third at the same time, major third, 1 fret higher. So instead of being on the 3rd fret, it'll be the 4th. And you can hear the difference here. Minor, major. These are movable, so I could play a root anywhere on that low E string. Let's pick the 9th fret, for example. From that 9th fret, let's play a minor third on the next string. Well, same exact shape that we had here on the top diagram, but this time the red note is on the 9th fret, so the minor third is going to be 2 frets below on the next string, and that's the 7th fret. That's a minor third. If I want to make it major, 1 fret higher. And that's how it works. That's how you can play minor intervals, major intervals all over the fretboard. These shapes that we played are movable, not only on the fretboard, like the frets, but also on the strings. So if I had a note on the 5th string, this time 7th fret, and we'll consider that to be our root, and we're trying to build a chord that has a minor third. Well, it's a chord. That means that I need two notes at the same time, so I'm not going to use the shape that used these two intervals on the same string. I'm going to use two different strings, and I want to build a chord with a minor third. That's my shape. Same exact shape that we had on the diagram. And in this case, my root is on the 5th string, 7th fret, and the third, which is minor, is on the 4th string, 5th fret. If I want to make it major, I'm going to raise that third a half step, 1 fret. That's major. Okay. Now let's put that into a practical use to analyze what we're playing. Let's play an open G chord. So if you've been strumming for a little bit, that's one of the first chords yet that you might practice. I'm talking about just the standard open G chord here, like that. And if we look at this, the first note that we hear is on the low E string, 3rd fret. That's a root. It's the note from which we're going to measure all the other notes. And you recognize that the second note we play here on the 5th string, 2nd fret, you know that shape now. That shape is a major 3rd shape. If it was minor, it would be like this. As a matter of fact, if I change this shape, and I change that 3rd to a minor 3rd, you hear how it changes the chord? The chord still works. It just sounds different. It sounds minor. That's a minor chord. That's the whole difference between a major chord and a minor chord. It's the 3rd that determines the nature of the musical element we're working with. And that's the same for chords, scales, keys, anything. The nature is determined by that 3rd, which is major or minor. And depending on the answer, if it's major or minor, it's going to go on one of these boxes. And the whole point of music theory, when using it to compose something, arrange something, or write a solo over a chord progression, is to match the elements together. So if I have a major chord, that's a major element, that's going to be my major box, I'm going to have to pick a scale from that major box to improvise over that major chord. If I pick an element from the minor box, that's a clash. That's going to sound tensed. That's okay to sound tense sometimes, but you need to know that it's going to sound tensed. That's the whole point in music theory. So far, we're good? Do you have any questions in the chat? Great. So that's how we can kind of analyze some chords sometimes that we might not be comfortable with. New chords, you just get a shape that you read in a book or that you found on your own just by playing around. You're like, oh, that sounds great. I want to use that somewhere. Well, that's where you analyze these notes to get a feel of what they are, what kind of intervals they are, and that'll tell you which box they go in, major box, minor box. And that'll give you more options as far as where should I start looking for a scale for that. If it's in the major box, well, I'll look in the major box. If it's in the minor box, in the minor box. And that's what it is. It works the same with scales too. So if a scale has a major 3rd, it's a major scale. And there are tons of major scales. And not just one, there are tons. As long as it has a major 3rd, it's a major scale in the major scale family. Minor 3rd, it's in the minor scale family. Looks like we have something going on. Yeah, a question.
Yeah, we've got a question here from Tracy. How do you play the 3rds when the root is an open string?
It's a good question. So that's where you will use the 3rd that is on the same string, right? So let's say we have a root here on the low E string open. That's my root, and I want to play a major 3rd on top of it. Well, I can't really use the traditional shape that I told you about to play a chord here. I can't do that in the same exact way that I showed you, because that major 3rd needs to be lower, on a lower fret, and we can't go lower than 0. But what you would do is find that major 3rd on the same string, so by using that shape, which is, this is the root, here's my major 3rd, and that'll be your major 3rd. Now, I know that you might want to build a chord with that, and that's where we're going to use a very useful interval that we'll talk about next week, the octave. The octave allows you to play the same note somewhere else on the fretboard at a higher pitch, but at the same exact note, and that'll help you get unstuck sometimes. I'm not going to get too much into it, but I still want to show you because you asked. Let's say that I want to play an E major chord. So E, that's an E note. The low E string open is an E, and I want to stack on top of it a major 3rd. Well, if you know your chords, this is the shape for an E major chord, open, like this. From low E string to high E string, I have frets 0, 2, 2, 1, 0, 0. Within that shape, that chord shape, if you look at what's happening between strings 4 and 3, I have on the 4th string fret 2, on the 3rd string fret 1, and that shape, that's a major 3rd, right? And this note, the starting point, which is the root, it's not the lowest note in the chord, but that note happens to be an E also. It's the octave of the open string. So it works exactly as if you had this as an open string, but it's played here. It doesn't sound exactly the same. One is higher than the other, but these two notes are E's, and they have the same function as a root. And now you see why this chord would be considered a major chord because of that major third here. And now if we make that minor, that major third minor, take that shape, lower that major third a half step below. So that means that instead of being a fret number 1, it's going to be fret 0, open. And that chord now, instead of being 0, 2, 2, 1, 0, 0, becomes 0, 2, 2, 0, 0, 0. That's an E minor chord. And you've played those chords probably before. Only one finger moves, one note changes, and that's that third. Major third, minor third. Next week, we'll talk about all the intervals, and it'll make much more sense, but that's basically how. Hopefully that helped a little bit. Anything else?
Yeah, we got a couple more here. This is another regarding the intervals. How far down the fretboard is required for transitioning across the intervals?
How far down? So down could mean, I'm guessing this way or this way. I'm not sure I understand the question, but I'll start talking about it and maybe you'll get the answer in there. From the low E string, open string here, if I keep going up, series of intervals getting wider and wider until I get to the 12th fret. And that's why you have those two dots usually as a reference point. Sometimes they're also on the side there of the guitar. From 0 to 12, that's an octave. That's the same exact note. So if you're starting to get into trouble here on the lower area of the fretboard with open strings, and you want to add like we did here, like a minor third, but you can't because you can't go lower than that, you can shift everything all the way 12 frets higher, and those notes will have the same function. So that can be part of your answer. That's how you kind of transition from one area of the fretboard to the other to transition. I don't know if that's what you meant. If you want to clarify, that's great on the chat. But I know there's probably a lot of comments on the chat to monitor.
Okay, we've got another one here from Steve Williams. How do intervals relate to whole or half steps?
So whole steps, half steps, a step and a half, 2 steps and all that, those are the units that we're using to measure. And I should have clarified that. When we're measuring something in real life, we're using inches or centimeters or miles. In music, we're using whole steps and half step. A half step on a traditional guitar is the smallest interval that we have. And it's not necessary for this course to learn what makes a minor third. You don't need to know that it's a step and a half. What I want you to think in terms of is just shapes, like I showed you in those 2 diagrams. Just use the shapes. I don't think it's very useful to really count, how many frets, as long as you know the shapes. But that's how they relate. Those are just units of measure, half steps and whole steps and so forth.
Okay, we've got one more, and then I think we can move back into your planned material. From Justin, what's the best way to determine the correct name of a chord discovered while playing?
So there's we're gonna talk a lot more about that in a future session, but basically what you want to do when you're discovering a new chord, you want to select usually the lowest note of that chord. Start from there, the lowest note of that chord, and consider that to be a root of your chord. That's the root, and that's what you're going to name that chord. So if I come up with this chord, for example, and a chord is just multiple notes at the same time, so it doesn't matter. You could play something beautiful like this, or something really awful like this. Oh, it's not that awful. Or like this, for example, that's still a chord. But no matter what the chord is, take the lowest note. So this, for example, you don't know what that is, you want to analyze it, take the lowest note that you hear. In this case, I'm starting on the 5th string, 5th fret. That's your root. And from that note, you're going to analyze all the other notes and write down the names of these intervals. So you might, in this case, we have minor sixth. We haven't covered that yet. We will next week. But we have a minor sixth, a minor seventh, and then this is a minor third. Write those down, and then find a scale that shares those elements that you just got. Try to record that chord if you have a recorder, or just play it and then play a scale that you make that shares those intervals. We'll get a lot more in depth on that topic, but as far as naming the chords, there's a whole section that we're going to expand on once we covered all the intervals, which comes next week. But that's basically how you would approach this. Good question, everyone. Keep them coming, and we'll move on a little bit. We talked about chords, right? The nature of the chords, and we're focusing on the third. This works also with scales. So one of the traditional scales that people start learning is the minor pentatonic scale. Sometimes it might be taught as just the pentatonic scale, but a pentatonic scale needs to be either major or minor, just like anything else. And the shape I'm talking about is this one. I'll consider the fifth fret here, low E string, fifth fret as a starting point. There are 2 notes per string for this pattern, and I'll just name the frets as I go, just to make sure that you know what I'm talking about. Frets 5, 8, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 8, and 5, 8. That's our minor pentatonic scale. And it's called a pentascale. Penta means 5 because there are 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then here, that acts as the root. We talked about octaves a little bit, which, again, we'll talk about more next week. But then we start over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. 3, 4, 5 will be higher on the fretboard, but I'm not going to bother doing those extensions. But that's a pentascale. So if I just take the 5 first notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, the first 2 notes here, you know them. The first one is the root. It's from that note that all the other notes are going to have context, which is important for a musical to have an emotional aspect to it. Without it, it's just a single sound. And you know these 2 first notes. The shape here is a minor third shape. So therefore, this is a minor scale. It's a minor penta scale, minor pentatonic scale. It's a 5-note scale that has a minor third. Therefore, it's in the minor box. It's a minor element. So just these 5 notes is a minor pentatonic scale. Now, what if we wanted to make a major pentatonic scale? We just need to change the third. Instead of having this minor third, we'd have a major third, which is a half step higher. You hear the difference? That's minor, major. It's a 5-note scale with a major third. This major pentatonic scale might not sound like the major pentatonic scale you learned. And that's because there are a lot of major pentatonic scales, a lot of minor pentatonic scales. In order to be pentatonic, a scale needs to have penta, 5 notes. In order to be major, it needs to have a major third. In order to be minor, a minor third. But all the other elements can be whatever you want. So that's the application here for that third. Now, we said earlier that, the third's important, determines the nature, but all the other intervals, what about those? Those could be major and minor too. For the more advanced, again, it's not true, but we'll talk about that next week. There are exceptions always, but let's just stick to that for now. Major, minor. So let's take, I'm going to give you an interval. I'm going to give you this interval right here. That's how it sounds. And I'm basically playing this, I'm considering the root on the low E string, 5th fret. And the note that I'm playing against that is found on the 4th string. So I'm skipping the 5th to the 4th, 7th fret. The distance between these 2 notes, you don't need to know what it is yet. You will next week. But I will tell you that this is called, it's a 7th interval. And if I tell you play 7th, what should you tell me? you should ask me, well, which one, major or minor, right? And this is actually a minor seventh. So let's say, go ahead and play that if you have it on your guitar, and we're gonna keep that root where it is. This note never changes. We're always gonna measure our intervals according to that here. This is a minor seventh. Make it major. I want you to make it a major seventh. So where would you put your finger to make it major? And feel free to type that on the chat, and I'll give you the answer. There might be a lag with the chat, so I'm not going to ask you what is it. You basically have to raise that. So if I'm on the 5th fret, you should be playing the 6th fret. That'll be a major 7th. Okay, let's try another one. Now I'm going to change the root. The root's going to be on the 5th string, 3rd fret. And I want you to play, so that's our root. And I want you to play this time the note that is on the 3rd string, 2nd fret. That's an interval, right? It's actually a 6th. And it's a major 6th. I want you to make that minor. So major, minor, how do you do that? Major, minor, you decrease the distance between these two notes. I don't want you to move the root. So in order to decrease that, you should be playing that 6th, not on the 2nd fret anymore, but on the 1st fret. Did anybody answer the 3rd fret? If so, you're wrong. And we can talk about that. But this is the major interval. To make it minor, decrease that. And if you're unsure, you can try to find that major 6th, the sound of that note. You can try to find it on the same string as you're playing your root, which is on the 5th string. Try to find this note. Here it is on the 12th fret. Now it's easier to visualize. How do you make this distance smaller? Well, without moving this, I'm going to have to move this 1 fret lower. This is wider than that. Therefore, this is a minor, this is a major. And if this is a minor, and you want to play a chord, you find this sound on the next string, and it happens to be 3rd string, 1st fret. So that's the idea with those major, minor intervals. And it'll be very, very useful when we start analyzing our chords and scales and match different musical elements together. I want to go back to the shape that we had on the screen with the two diagrams, major and minor thirds, because there's a particularity on the guitar between the 2nd and the 3rd string. And you see on the 2nd diagram there, the shape changed. It's no longer between the root and the 3rd. It's no longer 3 frets, but this time it's 4 frets. And that's because, actually, sorry, I'll take that back. There's a little confusion with what I just said, not the diagram. But, okay, sorry, let's start over. Scratch what I just did. Let's go back to the diagram. Okay, let's look at the top one. The top one, we now know how to build major thirds, minor thirds on a single string or as a chord on 2 consecutive strings. Let's build a major third. So we're on the low E string, 5th fret for our root. Major third would be 1 fret higher than the minor, so it would be on the 5th string, 4th fret, right? This shape is movable, not only horizontally. These are all major thirds, but also vertically. So I can start on any. These are all major thirds, same exact shape. On the 4th string, all major thirds. The 2nd diagram shows you a major third, but the shape changes. It's no longer separated by 1 fret. If the shape didn't change, I would have my root on the 3rd string, 5th fret, major third on the 2nd string, 4th fret. But this time, no. the diagram shows you that it's on the same fret. And that's not a mistake. That's because of the way the guitar is tuned. Anytime you have an interval that involves strings 2 and 3, and that's something you should write down. If you have a notepad or something, it's an exception. Anytime you have an interval that involves strings 2 and 3, the interval shape is going to change slightly by 1 fret. So the shape that you need to learn here is going to change because it involves strings 2 and 3. You can even do a little bar here if you want. And that's a major third. So if I have a root on the 3rd string, 5th fret, a major third above would be on the 2nd string, 5th fret. And if I want to make that minor, that 5th fret, 2nd string needs to be on the 4th fret, 2nd string. That's a minor interval. See the difference? So let's practice that a little bit. Let's say that we have a root on the 3rd string, 12th fret. That's our reference point. And from there, I want you to play major third. You should be playing, if you're playing it as a chord, you should be playing on the 2nd string, 12th fret, same exact fret. It's a different shape than we talked about before because it involves strings 2 and 3. Now, what if you were starting to build a scale this time? Same root, which is 3rd string, 12th fret, and you want to play a major third on the same string. The shape does not change this time because it doesn't involve strings 2 and 3 together. Make sense? So that's why you need to kind of pay attention to that. And that's also why a lot of players, or maybe not a lot, but more and more players, I'm thinking about a friend of mine, Tom Quayle, English fusion player, and a lot of others actually. They tune their guitar in perfect fourths, which means that between each sets of strings, there's a perfect fourth each time. It's the same exact distance between 2 strings all the time, and that means that there's no switching of shapes. The shapes remain the same regardless of where you are on the fretboard. So that's the advantage. Not on guitar, not on a traditional tuning. So that's the idea with that diagram. You'll find the charts that we're talking about somewhere in the download section of the video page where you can check them out. And you'll also find I wrote down a shape for chords, and I don't know if we have that on the screen or not, if we can get that on there. There we go. And this is a kind of a visual thing where if you compare both of these chords, the top one is an A major chord, the bottom one is a minor chord. And if you compare each note one by one, the only note that changes is the note that is on the 3rd string there. And that 3rd string on the top one is a major third. And the 3rd string on, it's a major third and it's on the 6th fret. And on the bottom one, it's on the 5th fret, 1 fret lower. And that's the difference. The third is the difference. I'm hesitating a little bit because I realize that I need to update those diagrams. The numbers on each of the notes correspond to something else. So I'll make sure to update that. I'll do that tonight as soon as I get back. But the shape changes, only one note changes, and it's that third that determines the nature of these chords. So that's basically what we have in this first session. It's all about major intervals, minor intervals. What we can get out of that is that intervals are going to help you develop the sound that you want, develop the emotional story that you want to tell. And I say emotional just because I'm not talking about necessarily like, ooh, I'm going to cry and stuff. Just it has emotional value. It's the music does, it tells a story. And that's what I mean by that. So intervals are used for that. Whether the intervals are played at the same time, like in a chord or a melodic line, that's what creates the story. It's the distance between these notes. Understanding how to analyze all those notes, the distance between these notes together, is going to allow you to pick, select, musical elements that match that. So you're going to pick from a box, major box, minor box, depending on the third. What I would like you to do this week is to practice major intervals in a chord context or in a scale context. So if it's a chord, play it at the same time, so these notes need to be on separate strings. If it's on a scale, they don't need to be on separate strings. And remember that there is an exception. Between the second and the third string, the shape is going to change. So you really have 4 shapes to learn this week. 1 shape for the major, 1 shape for the minor, and 2 other shapes with those exceptions if these intervals involve strings 2 and 3 at the same time. And that's the idea. And lastly, I want to talk about this idea that major chords, major scales are happy, minor chords, minor scales are sad. It's not necessarily true. I was thinking about that driving here. I never liked the idea of telling people this is how you should feel when you hear this particular chord. But then I wondered too, why do people generally say that major is happy and minor is sad? And here's what I came up with, and that might help you a little bit. It has to do with, again, these intervals. So if we consider a major chord a major third, a minor chord a minor third, those are the distances. And usually, the wider the interval, well, not usually, all the time, the wider the interval, the easier it is for the ear to separate these 2 notes, therefore to analyze these 2 notes, and therefore to understand these 2 notes. If I play something like this, for example, and if you concentrate on that, you can kind of separate in your mind this from this. And that's a wide interval. Major is wider than minor. So if I take that interval, and this note is the root from that root, it's got a wide interval which can be associated with major. So it makes you a little happier because you can discern these 2 notes. Now if I play an interval that is really narrow, that doesn't make you very happy because it's hard. You've got to put more work to it. To distinguish these 2 notes takes more effort than distinguishing these 2 notes. More separation. So I think there's something there where people kind of usually tend to be more at ease, happier with major intervals than minor. That is just my take on it. But all that to say that I'm not going to tell you that this chord should sound happy and this one should sound sad. I think it's something that you should discover. We're going to talk a lot more about that next week because we'll cover all the intervals this time. And you will see that there's more to it than major and minor next week. Not much, really, but a little bit more. And we're going to classify those, and we're going to try to kind of get a feel for what these intervals do to you when you hear them. And that's a personal thing. That's something that you need to explore. And as you're learning these intervals and memorizing them this week, I want you to try to anticipate the sound of these intervals. So you play a note. If this is a major third, na 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 na, what would a minor third sound like? Ba ba. It's got to be smaller than that. Ba 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 ba, and then try ba ba. Check with yourself. At first, it might sound completely off, but the more you do that, the more you'll get a closer range to the target note. If you get in the habit of doing that, you're going to have even more control on your music when you improvise, and you'll be able to target notes without knowing where they are on the fretboard, but because you can hear it, and because you practice enough, you'll be very close to hitting that particular note until you hit it all the time. And the more you can do that, the freer you'll be to express what you really want to express, not what this guitar dictates that you should say. You are using this as a tool, and knowing all of your intervals is going to help you do that. We're coming to an end here. There's about an hour. I'm going to open the chat for questions, and I'll take them.
Okay, we've got a handful here. So basically, you view a fretboard as a ruler, and the root note is your starting point.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly right. I wanted to bring an actual ruler as a prop, but decided it would be a little lame, so I didn't. But yeah, absolutely. Very good.
Okay. I have seen the C major scale start on the low E string with the C note on the A string. If the lowest note denotes the key, how would I know it's the C major if it's not labeled as such?
It's a good question. That gets into harmony more. A C major scale is your alphabet, and usually we take the lowest note and we call that the root. Now, you saw that scale starting from an even lower note than that. Those notes are still part of C major. And in that case, what determines the key, it's not just the alphabet, because the alphabet on its own, really is out of context. It's actually the chord you're playing over that will determine the key. It's not the starting point, the starting note of your scale. It's usually the bass in a chord progression or the rhythm guitar player or the keyboard. But yeah, that's a very good question. We'll get more into that. And as we unfold things next week, I think some more questions will come, but eventually you will get a very satisfying answer. But that's a good question.
Okay. How do the strings relate to each other in terms of intervals? And what is a good way of using this to visualize intervals without having to memorize shapes?
Okay, so two parts of this question. The first one, how do the strings relate to each other in terms of intervals? On a traditionally tuned guitar, so standard tuning, which is where I'm at and probably what you're at too, each string is separated by a perfect fourth. That's next week, right? The term perfect, we haven't covered that today, but it's a perfect fourth, except between strings 2 and 3. That's the exception, and that's a major third, and we know that because the shape for a major third was on the same frets, right? And it's movable, so I can be on 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Hey, that's a major third. The distance between this note and this one, the third string and the second, is a major third. So perfect fourths, except between second and third, that's a major third. And a good way of using that to visualize the intervals, there's none that I know of. And I know the idea behind that. You want to take a shortcut. I'm all about shortcuts. But trust me, the simplest way is to memorize these intervals. And next week will be the simplest way that I know. And so be there next week.
Okay, here's I think this kind of clarifies that question from earlier from KK Ward. I can easily understand the interval spacing on one string, but I am having problems understanding how far I move down the fretboard on the next string.
Okay, so again, next week is going to unwrap all that. The main difficulty is to remember that between the second and the third string, there is a difference. The shape is going to change whenever your interval involves that. But it all has to do with moving the interval. So if I am on the 5th string, 5th fret, and I consider that note to be my root, my starting point, on top of that I want to stack a major third. If you're not sure where to put that major third in a chord shape on the next string, go to your regular shape, which is like a scale shape on the same string, and find that sound on the next string. Same exact sound, and that's your interval. If you want to make this minor, well, you need to decrease the distance between these two notes. And to decrease that, you're going to decrease the landing note. So this note. This is major. To make it minor, you decrease the landing note 1 fret. And that shape is a minor third shape. And these are movable anywhere you want. It's going to be the same exact shape. Any string, any fret. The only difference, again, is between strings 2 and 3. Hope that helped a little bit.
Okay. Edge EM would really like you to show the pentatonic scale again.
Yep. So I guess we're talking about the minor pentatonic scale. If you just say pentatonic scale, I'll play just 5 notes in a row. And that would be a pentatonic scale, but there's a lot of pentatonic scales. So we're going to talk about minor pentatonic scale, which is, if you had to know one scale, that's the one. Many players have made a career with it. And it's a movable shape, so we need to find a starting point, a root to start with, and I'll consider the 5th fret of the low E string. That's our root, a reference point. And there are 2 notes per string, so that makes it easier. So I'll name the series of 2 notes. Starting from the low E string all the way to the high E string, we have frets 5, 8, which is a minor third. On the next string, 5, 7. Next one, 5, 7. Next one, 5, 7. Next one, 5, 8. And 5, 8. And notice that there are only 2 patterns, either 5, 7 or 5, 8. The low string and the high string, the 6th and the 1st, have the same exact shapes, 5, 8. All the rest is 5, 7, except for the 2nd string, which is also 5, 8. You can use index pinky for 5, 8 and index ring for 5, 7. So all together, 5, 8, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 8, 5, 8. And that's the scale, the minor pentatonic scale.
Okay, this might be a tough one. Why is the 2nd string tuned differently?
I don't know. I'm not sure. There are some advantages, though. And here's one. Or I don't know, actually, if that really answers your question. But if all the strings were tuned exactly the same, then the low E string, which is the 6th string, it's called low E because that note to open is an E, is the same note as the high E string, which is the 1st string. Those notes are E's, both E's. Now, they don't sound exactly the same. One is higher than the other, but they have the same function. That means that anything I play on the low E string can be reproduced exactly on the 1st string. It'll sound higher. So that's one advantage. And if all the strings were tuned exactly the same, then that high E string would be higher than an E, and you can reproduce exactly what you'd play on the low E string. So that's one advantage, but I'm not quite sure. And a lot of players are transitioning to a different type of tuning, but that would mean relearning a lot of things, and most players use standard tuning. I'm sure there's a better explanation somewhere, but is that it? Great. So throughout the week, just get comfortable with these intervals. Check out the charts. You can rewatch this video. And next week really is probably the most important lesson as far as unwrapping a lot of concepts. I didn't want to start with it today because I wanted to gently ease in and explain a little bit why theory. But if you have to watch one session, it's next week. Keep your questions too as the week progresses. If you have some that come, write them down, and I'll take a few minutes next week to answer those too. And thanks everyone for being there. I hope you like this first lesson and 7 more sessions to come. So I'll see you next week, same time, same place, and practice well. Have a great week.